The rules of a violent world are simple. The more powerful, the lower the risk. Sino-American soldiers. The likelihood of compatibility is minimal, but in the face of tensions, it is inevitable that a just-in-case will pop up in people's hearts. What if the Americans really do it? This worry cannot be eliminated by any means. That being the case, we will simply. Let's talk about this in case. Let's start with politics, strategy and all that stuff. Let's simply compare the militaries of China and the United States. Hard power. Military power. Although it may not seem useful in peacetime, but in fact it is a country's last card. It is also all foreign policy decisions of a country. The most basic basis. From a survival safety perspective, the environment facing China has always been harsh. If you think of the world as a jungle, then China is a country that lives up to its name. Real jungle orphans. In the process of growing up in China, unity and friendship are the vision. Reality is embattled. Open the modern history of China. It's basically a collection of stories about being beaten up in a gang. This harsh living environment make China confront the army. The development of energy is very urgent. Cut demand. But military might. It doesn't mean that you can develop it if you want to. Military development does not generate economic benefits. Therefore, if the national strength is weak, if you can't it will not work. You have no strength. If you don't have strength, you will be hanged. Countries that are hanged cannot develop. If they can't, they're weaker. It's a vicious cycle. China's current greatest military threat from the sea. Therefore, for China, the Navy is the first line of defense, is the key to staying out of the country. Can we sleep soundly? First, it depends on the strength of the Navy. The pinnacle of the Chinese Navy in modern history. Bayangshui. Although Beiyang Water City's record is polluted, but the ranking is very bright. The city was established in 1888. Its peak 10 miles once ranked first in Asia, 6th in the world. However, the debut and peak rankings later fell all the way. But no matter what, it is also in the top 10 in the world. In the next 100 years, the Chinese Navy has never returned to this position. Navy power falls easily. It's too hard to get up. Due to the construction and maintenance of ships, the team requires a lot of capital and technology and long-term investment. Therefore, the Navy is also figuratively called gold-devouring behemoth. Poor people can't make good warships. In 1974, during the Battle of Shisha, the People's Navy even had to use hundreds of tons of dinghies to fight against Vietnam's 2,000-ton warships. The development of the world's military level. I won't stop and wait for you because you are pitiful. It started in the 80s. The navies of the great powers began to gradually enter the Zestonian era. Zeston is a phased seismic radar, building an air defense and anti-missile system. Rely on phased shock radar and vertical missile launch system. Modern Zeston warships can intercept more than a dozen at once, even 24 aerial targets. Greatly improved resistance, saturation attack defense capability. The entire rules of naval warfare were rewritten. And this time, the combat effectiveness of the main warships of the Chinese Navy, Western countries, the level of the 1950s, the air defense capability is almost nil. 1. Enemy fighters could knock us down. 1996. The US only sent one aircraft carrier over for a walk. Let China's Taiwan Strait exercise Chow Chow end. China will have to tighten its belt in a few years. Go to Russia, purchase unfinished Soviet-era modern books. Destroyer to call the facade. But even the new guy who was bought with a lot of money. There's no Zeston system. Products that are behind the times, compared to the American destroyer Zeston. That's beyond our reach. Huge power gap means China simply cannot maintain sea control on its doorstep. No sea control. Enemy aircraft carriers can easily bring the carrier plane to your side. Wanton bombing of your homeland. Others can threaten your hinterland at every turn. You're always preparing for homeland showdown. This situation will lead to various diplomatic decisions. Timid. If you stand on the threshold of the early 21st century and look, China is just one country in Brazil. India is almost a second-tier poor country. Its navy is simply not qualified to. Fleets of great powers are compared. A little place. By a few Western second-hand warships at random, it can outperform the Chinese Navy on paper. This is also why the United States will be in the early 21st century with confidence. The reasons for focusing on the Middle East. What the internet says has given China a decade of respite. The interest opportunity is actually because of that People don't look down on you at all. But China is not India and Brazil after all. After joining the WTO, China has ushered in its own era of accumulated wealth. With the rise of the country, the sleeping naval industry is beginning to wake up. Year 2003, China has finally launched its first ship. Phase-controlled seismic radar and vertical launch system for warships. This is the Charleston system in China. Completely independently developed by China. Of course, we can only develop it ourselves. Nobody's going to sell us this stuff. This set of things is proudly called by the Chinese, Aegis of China. For ease of description, the International Zeiston warship of the United States and Chinese Aegis warships. In the following we will collectively refer to the Shield ship. However, the Chinese Navy did not immediately start mass production of new warships. Instead, they took baby steps. Catch up with the world's advanced level. So-called trot running. It means that each generation of technology produces only a small amount of product and technical accumulation. After making progress on this basis, reproduce a small batch of product. Conduct new verification and accumulation. So the cycle repeats. After a short period of time, trotting. Fast iteration. China has run out of other naval powers. Decades of evolution. Year 2010. Domestic warships have finally caught up with the world's first-class level. This time, the People's Navy officially opened after the Cold War. The largest shipbuilding. After the frenzy, the tonnage of warships launched each year. They are all close to other countries in the world when they launched warships. Some of tonnage. The United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War for building a main destroyer. It's 3.1 ships per year and 2.6 ships per year. China has achieved an average speed in the past 10 years. 3.7 ships per year. In 2019, 10 main Shield ships were launched in 1 year. The strength of these 10 Shield ships alone exceeds that of the UK, France, the sum of all the shields of the Italian Navy. This is the entire history of human naval forces. It's all a breathtaking speed. Under continuous summons frenzy, the strategic level of the People's Navy surpassed that of France in 2000. Enter the top 5. It surpassed Russia in 2016. Japan and the United Kingdom became the second largest country in the world. The great powers were completely thrown away in 2019. The existence of a single gear after becoming the United States. The current strength of the People's Navy's active warships has surpassed the European Union. Some of the Navy. This explosion is too sudden. People still don't understand what's going on. The Chinese Navy has far outpaced the United States. Foreign powers left behind. In between, even a rough process of sick leave. Omitted. Although China, quickly leaving one great power after another behind, but there is no qualification and leisure time to be complacent because the Chinese army has to face. The United States is the greatest competitor on the planet. So what is the current relationship between the Chinese and American navies? China's current largest number of Shield ships is 052D. Displacement 7,000 tons. Combat effectiveness. Stronger than the strongest UK in Europe, 45 lines of main expulsion. Shipperoo U.S. Burke-class main Shield ship. However, a destroyer with a displacement of several thousand tons. Not the ace of the top navy. The real decisive force is 10,000-ton large Shield ship. China's 12,000-ton large Shield ship is 055. There are two core forces in the modern naval fleet. One is an aircraft carrier. One is a large Shield ship. Aircraft carriers are responsible for airstrikes, responsible for the air defense and anti-missile missions and protecting aircraft carriers. Today's world, there are only 4 types of 10,000-ton Shield ships in active service. One is the Everest class in the United States. One is China's 055. One is the Japanese Maya class. One is the King Sejong of Korea. However, these two 10,000-ton shields from Japan and South Korea. It's actually an American Burke copy. Elongated and weighted version. Although the tonnage is tens of thousands, but the combat effectiveness is not as good as later models of the Burke class. Large shields are expensive, powerful even if only equipped with one. It can also reduce the air defense interception level of the entire fleet. Take it to a new level. The U.S. Navy is the first in the world. Common sense inference. Their 10,000-ton scale. The combat effectiveness of the Shield ship should also be the first in the world. But the development of a battleship. It's not just the efforts of the naval industry. It depends on the course of history. 1997. The United States is preparing to develop the latest generation of Navy was at its peak at this time. Then President Clinton. See the world from the deck of Bork 2A. There is not a single one on the sea surface of the world. An opponent worthy of American attention. Duga seek defeat. So President Clinton pinched his finger. Zihaquin is firmly in his hands. There is no competition at all to be placed today. American warships can swagger to duty. What a country's doorstep. This is us. Why is it always possible in modern warfare? Seeing the U.S. aircraft carrier carrying the plane recklessly. Reasons to bomb enemy countries. In the hearts of Americans. Since the task of ensuring sea control is entrusted to active main battleship Burke G. That's more than enough. So, one step further to develop new warships for this purpose. It's a waste. So it started in 1997, new warships developed by the United States. The main functions of its design. It's not a battle for sea dominance. It's how to get rid of it cheaply and easily. That is, how to save money. His main function and object is to use cheap ships. Shelling of the coast, passing a battleship on someone else's doorstep. You can paralyze the enemy. His combat goals and bombing of enemy countries. Aircraft carrier similar. But no formation, no aircraft, lower cost of action. This kind of design idea, it requires the battleship to be invisible, and it has powerful ground attack firepower. They don't prioritize air defense. And here's how it works. Everest. This sci-fi battleship concentrates the most cutting-edge technology in the United States. Each piece costs up to $7.50 billion. Approaching Britain's newest aircraft carrier, HMS Elizabeth. However, the Everest is not a traditional destroyer. It is more accurate to call it the Wuku ship. The basic idea of the U.S. Navy is to control sea springs, then continue to be destroyed by the Burke class. Targets on land were handled by Everest. There is no problem with such a choice in the United States. The Burke-class destroyer has been in service for more than 20 years, but its combat effectiveness far ahead of other countries' main destroyers. However, people are not as good as heaven. The first new American warship, the Everest Walter, just served. China is in the water. The 055055 is a masterpiece of the Chinese naval industrial combat effectiveness comprehensively exceeds the latest blogs and the main shield ship. At this time, the Americans discovered the sea spring. It's not taken for granted that it's in their hands. Then Americans are more. Can advanced Everest suppress 055? Although technically, Everest is more advanced than 055, but the actual combat effect is another matter. Because his positioning is different. Everest. He used all his advanced technology to ground attack the top, but he didn't think much about making Haikwan. He originally planned to make Haikwan, implemented by Bork memory. But, you're welcome, it can't compare to China's 055 now. The new American Everest didn't think about it. The 055 is equipped with the world's most advanced dual-band seismic radar for large shields for small shields. Such a luxurious configuration, guaranteed that 055 can take into account long-distance target search and the need for accurate fire control at close range. And Everest has only small shields and no big shields. The ability to search for targets at a distance is not as good as 055. The other 055 has 112 vertical launch units. It also overwhelmed Everest's anti-aircraft firepower, 80 vertical hair units. So, although Everest had a huge tonnage and the shape of science fiction, another advanced technology, but the role in the battle for Haikwan is very limited. His actual combat effect is not as good as you're welcome, not to mention incomparable to zero. The Americans found themselves a little bit duped, but they were the ones who lied to them. Therefore, the U.S. Navy had to start developing it immediately. New generation tradition destroyer. There are two programs currently being implemented. The first option is develop blogs on the basis of Blog Collections 3, but because the foundation of the blog collection is too old, limited upgrade potential, Blog 3 went on design drawings. It is still lagging behind China's 055. What about the second option? The second option is on the basis of Everest. Developing the next generation can adapt the large main shield ship LSC competing for the demand of Sea Spring. This project will take more than 10 years. This means that, because the United States ordered the wrong technology, the reason for clicking the wrong technology is because of him and find no opponent. This will result in at least the next 10 years. China's main warship 055 will be the most powerful destroyer on the planet. You could say that the service of 055 marks the end of the Chinese army. A history of being inferior to others. Now 7055 have been launched. It is expected before 2025. The delivery of the first 8 ships can be completed and develop combat capabilities. The United States is investing in the development of destroyers by themselves, but his status as the hegemon of the sea is still unshakable. Moving American maritime supremacy from his unrivaled aircraft carrier. The United States not only has the largest number of aircraft carriers that can take off and land fourth-generation fighter F-35B, capable of vertical takeoff means and landing, he can not only be deployed on aircraft carriers, it can also be deployed on amphibious assault ships. That is to say, the Chinese Navy not only has to face the United States 11 super aircraft carriers, it also needs to face 10 U.S. ships equipped with F-35B, amphibious assault ship. The gap between the rich and the poor in the world's naval power is very serious. All the navies of the world put together, less than half the strength of the U.S. Navy. Although the Chinese Navy is 10 years of explosive development, all the way to the second place in the world, but the strength of the finger is calculated. It is only 20% of the level of the U.S. Navy. Emphasize. The world except the United States, the combined naval power of all nations, less than half of the United States. China accounts for another 20% of this half. So, if you go to the center of the Pacific to fight the U.S. military, that's a dead end. The U.S. military has the largest number of aircraft carriers and ships in the world, control the air supremacy, can easily rely on massive bombers, kill the opposing fleet in seconds. But this situation is not absolute, because if you move the battlefield to the coast of the mainland, that's another story. On such a battlefield, the U.S. Navy not only faces opposing navies, we have to face the Air Force on the other side's soil. If you can't defeat the enemy's air power, no air supremacy, no amount of aircraft carrier is useless. In the Western Pacific, for example, once the enemy enters the Chinese coastline, distance within 1,000 kilometers, Chinese Air Force land aircraft fighters will join the battle. Although the United States is surrounded by China, many land-based air bases were also established and deployed advanced fighter jets, but the air base is a fixed target. It is vulnerable to ballistic missile attack. China is armed with a large number of Dongfeng ballistic missiles, specifically designed to attack enemy land airfields. America comes first. These air bases deployed in the second island chain, in a hypothetical Sino-American conflict, is ineffective, because the first wave destroyed him, or paralyzed. As soon as the war begins, Rocket Army Salvo Airport, the fighter jets at these bases, it's simply not safe to store and resupply. You can only keep moving to protect yourself. The only way for the United States to gain air supremacy is with aircraft carriers or mobile units. But the missiles are relatively difficult to hit. But China is as high as it was during the Dongfeng period. Supersonic weapon. America can't defend. There are currently such weapons. Only China and Russia. The United States is still experimenting. When the Russian-Ukrainian conflict was in full swing, he's just had his first successful experiment. But we expect the enemy to be lenient, even if the aircraft carrier is not completely destroyed. Then once the United States encroaches on China's coastal waters, the situation remains that the U.S. Navy PK. Because the battlefield here is near the Chinese mainland. American aircraft carriers usually have shipping one or rotation, maintenance, and the Middle East and the Atlantic. Up to 6 aircraft carriers can be dispatched to the Asia-Pacific. Of course, it's still a land deposit. We add 10 aircraft carriers, 10 amphibious assault ships to estimate. This lineup can carry at most 600 or 700 carrier-based aircraft participated in the Sino-American battlefield. Comparison of air power that the two sides can engage in combat. And it goes something like this. The United States Navy and Marine Corps, it can carry up to 700 aircraft, advanced fighter jets to the front line. This includes the F-35C, F-35B, F-18E, FG F-18CD and other signals. China has approximately 1,300 advanced fighter jets. This includes both 20 and 20, Su-35 and 16, 15 and 10 series, and 11 series, Su-30 MKK and other models. At present, there are only 2 in China and the United States. It has more than 1,000 modern fighter jets. His scale and quality are leading the way, one person in other countries. But there's one thing about air combat: advanced fighter jets can easily fight. A technologically backward fighter realize more with less, and it's a hang. So air power can't just look at numbers. It also depends on the technical level of the equipment, the main equipment of the world's air powers. It is still dominated by third-generation fighter jets, one of the most advanced third-generation aircraft, also known as the third-generation semi-fighter. It is characterized by the equipment of a new type of edged linear seismic radar. Better engine performance, possesses a strong ability to attack beyond the TV drama. The current 3 generations of semi-combat oil in the world: Typhoon in the European Union, French Gust, American F-18EF, F-15SA, Russian Su-35, China's Ju-16, Ju-10C, etc. But no matter how powerful the third-generation half fighter is, essentially still a product of the old days. Currently at the top of the air combat food chain, the most powerful fighter at the end is a fourth-generation aircraft. With stealth ability, you can easily kill the third-generation machine in seconds. The representative work of the fourth-generation aircraft is the US Air Force with the F-22. States. Again, there is no doubt that the rest of the world has achieved air rolling. The US Air Force was at its peak in 2011. President Obama at the time, looking out from the cockpit of the F-22. Global sky. There is no opponent worth mentioning. Obama pinched his fingers. Before the next generation of fighter jets is developed, there is no need to add F-22. To save on maintenance costs, then just dismantle the F-22 production line. Dismantled. As a result, in 2017, China's fourth-generation fighter, the J-20-1, President Trump panicked. He wants to revive the F-22 production line, but because it was too expensive to settle the account, it was finally abandoned. So the performance is weaker. The cheaper F-35 established himself in the U.S. Army, the dominance of air power. China has developed a fourth-generation aircraft and rapidly formed. And it's not just about effectiveness. Great stimulus for the rest of the world. Countries subsequently, they have come up with their own fourth-generation machine in their solutions. Eyes, I can do it with China. But it turns out they can't. At present, only China can produce a fourth-generation machine. The United States and Russia. There are 5 fourth-generation aircraft that can fly in the world. American F-22, F-35, Russian Su-57, China's G-20, G-31. Of which F-22, F-35, G-20. The Su-57 is already in service. China's G-31 currently only has a prototype. It is being modified and developed to become a carrier-based aircraft. There are 4 criteria for evaluating the combat effectiveness. The first is invisibility, the second is super excited, and the third is supersonic cruise. The so-called cruise refers to can fly supersonic for a long time without afterburner. And the fourth is supernormal perception. In these 4 fourth-generation aircraft in service, Su-57 stealth ability is actually not very good. Strictly speaking, the Su-57 has not crossed the threshold of the fourth-generation aircraft. The US F-35 does not have the ability to cruise supersonically. They're not very maneuverable. China's G-20 basically meets 4 capabilities, but at present, it is mainly due to insufficient engine power. No real thrust. Hypermaneuverability has not yet met the design goals. America's F-22 satisfies thought ability. The current comprehensive strength is the strongest. Some people believe that, since he doesn't have a photoelectric radar, so it can't match China's G-20. Anyway, each has its own advantages and disadvantages. However, this shortcoming of China's G-20, with China's technological advancements, weaknesses will continue to be made up for. In the future, the domestic new generation engine WF-15 will mature. The G-20 will indisputably surpass the F-22 in January. Become the world's most powerful fourth-generation machine. And worse. The F-22 in the United States is due to Obama's slutty operation. Take apart the production line, so he can't upgrade next. So there you have it. We're going to analyze actual combat, because in actual combat, it was also influenced by an important factor. It's all about logistics. The closer the battlefield is to the home base, the easier it is to resupply fighter jets. The stronger the combat effectiveness. The U.S. military, in order to make its own fighter jets, can be fully supplied. The aircraft carrier needs to be as close to the combat area as possible. And there is a paradox. If the U.S. aircraft carrier approaches the Chinese mainland, 800 kilometers, will be exposed to Chinese land-based fighter raids and within the radius of the bomber strike, the anti-ship fire density in the offshore waters of the Chinese mainland carriers will be very dangerous. If the aircraft carrier is too far from the mainland, for example, greater than 1,000 although relatively safe, but ship-load aircraft have to fly long distances to fight. This will result in insufficient oil, the need to support aerial combat, so the air combat capability is seriously reduced. Even if the fighter air combat capabilities of both sides are in the military, the security of the platform is not at the same level. Land airports will not be silent. The most important thing is that he has many. The aircraft carrier. If you hit 2 or 3 missiles, you will lose your combat effectiveness. And how many aircraft carriers can there be? Certainly. The reason why the U.S. military is caught in such a contradiction. The fundamental reason is that the PLA's naval and air force joint capabilities and, compared to the U.S. Navy, there is no generation difference. Based on a strong military, China's home court advantage can be used to the fullest extent. To sum up, if the U.S. military wants to invade China, he will face this situation. The United States Secretary of State, carried by aircraft carriers and amphibious assault ships, 700 carrier aircraft, to challenge China's 1,300 aircraft, third and fourth-generation air superiority fighter. In order to avoid the risk of the aircraft carrier US being fleet sunk, can only stay in about 1,000 kilometers of coastline, waiting for the outcome of the air battle. And China's powerful naval fleet, it will be under the local fighter jet, provide powerful support for air combat. During an air battle between American the two sides, fighter jets are subject to a lot of restrictions. Our fighter jets. It's hard to do this kind of action because the sea, it is illuminated by the radar of the Chinese Navy's roadbed in the sky. Air Force's large early warning aircraft surveillance. Our fighter jets have no blind spots. In addition, U.S. fighter jets should be on guard from at any time. From the surface shield group, attack of dense air defense missiles, and our fighter jets can concentrate without fear. Fighting. Plus a large number of surface-to-air missile fire support. The U.S. military wants to 700 aircraft take air supremacy off the coast of China. There is no chance. If you can't take control, it is impossible to air raid mainland fortresses and cities. The only thing to do is to be thousands of kilometers away. Long-range launch of thousands of Tomahawk cruise missiles. But cruise missiles fly far. Slow-speed thousands of Tomahawk cruise missiles, far from enough, penetrating China's offshore waters by a large number of warships, missile systems, composed of a tight air defense network. Kosovo War. NATO has the advantage of absolute air supremacy. Aircraft carried out a total of 32,000 sorties. 13,000 tons of bombs. Only about 10 million people. Yugoslavia, an area only the size of Zhejiang, amplitude. And without air superiority, bombing troops in front of air superiority fighters. It's basically a head giveaway. So the US military wants to carry out airstrikes on the Chinese mainland. Basically no attack. In fact, for the US military, how to get out. That's what they should be focusing on. Because if the US runs out of carrier aircraft, that means hundreds of Chinese bombers. You can swagger and fly to the US military outside the fleet's air defense perimeter, launch hundreds of US anti-ship missiles. Let's talk about it this way. In the current comparison of strength, even if the US military can overwhelm all the forces it can, nor to the Chinese mainland substantial harm. On the contrary, it is possible to account for a large number of carrier aircraft. The Rand Corporation in the United States a few years ago. There's a chart in the report. China and the United States and military the first capabilities in the Maoist region. Made an intuitive comparison. Look at this chart. We see that from 1996 to 2017, China's advantage is increasing significantly. Back in 1996, most of the projects are clearly dominated by the United States. By 2017, China has 2 dominant projects. The United States has 3 leading projects. The remaining 4 projects are all evenly matched. That is to say, according to the Rand Corporation, in this area of the First Island chain, China's military power in 2017 has caught up with the US. But that was 2017. 5 years ago in 2017, for China's military development, just a new round. Just a starting point for the explosion. Whether it's a previous report by the Rand Corporation or our current analysis, as time goes by, the accuracy of these conclusions will be reduced, because China's military power is developing too fast. Currently, Chinese shipyards are building a third domestically produced aircraft, Mother 003, and approaching the water. 003 is another epoch-making equipment of the Chinese Navy. Its tonnage is close to NIMS, the main aircraft carrier in active service of the United States, the world's most advanced electromagnetic ejection technology. This is since World War II. For the first time, a U.S. aircraft carrier has come close in strength. And benchmarking, the latest U.S. aircraft carrier, the Ford-class, nuclear-powered aircraft carrier 004 for the next 10 years. In terms of air power, we are very. You will soon see the domestic stealth of the benchmark American B-2. The long-range bomber H-20 made its debut. What are the trends? Is over time, the probability and degree of threat to China will only get smaller. The Western Pacific offensive and defense will change. Many of the decisions we see now, it's all based on this confidence. At this time, someone will have a new problem. Is this an arms race? Can you afford it financially? After all, the Soviet Union was dragged down by the arms race. About this issue, we can refer to several data. The Soviet Union responded to the Cold War arms race. Its military spending as a share of GDP has long been above 10%. What about America today? Because without the pressure of the Cold War, so now the U.S. military spending 3 to 5% of GDP. The last 10 years of armaments. China's military spending as a share of GDP has exploded. The answer is around 1.5%. That is to say, although it appears to the outside world. In recent years, China's military development has been very lively. China has not really made any efforts at all, and this price/performance mainly ratio benefited from China's own well-developed industrial chain, the ultra-high efficiency brought about by the system. We can give an example to compare. Recently, the new generation of American frigate FFGX construction plan invites tenders to close. Winning the bidding was an Italian group, because their solution is the cheapest. Frigate on board. The team's positioning is lower than the destroyer. Is a supporting role. Since it is a supporting role, nature seeks value for money. This so-called new generation frigate, not technically advanced, comprehensive strength in China's earlier 052C destroyer almost, for no other reason, proven technologies are cheaper. So Americans go to great lengths. A new type of frigate that keeps costs down. How much will it cost? First ship. FFGX frigates cost up to $1.281 billion. Even if the cost of mass production decreases later, it costs $1 billion, equivalent to about 7 or 8 billion yuan. What is this concept? The best shield ship in the world. Displacement is FFGX, double China's main region 055. The cost is only 6 billion renminbi. Using the logic of Tianqi horse racing, America's inferior horse bought more expensive than a Chinese fine horse. And that's perfectly normal. One of the functions of the world factory is to drive all things into cabbage prices, including armaments. And the factory of the world is Mali? Is that China? So, any country that wants to engage in an arms race with China, that's tantamount to bleeding yourself. Based on cost advantage, the military gap between China and the United States will gradually narrow. The speed of shrinking mainly depends on the intensity of Chinese investment. Saying so much, from the past 20 years of Sino-US military development, it's obvious. The rise of China in the early 21st century, it was an accident for the whole world. Most countries are not ready to adapt to the accident. China has currently established, also under construction are planned stealth fighter jets, shield heavy aircraft carrier, new long-range bombers, etc. This equipment, certainly not for a walk on the doorstep. The slogan of the People's Navy is to become stronger towards the sea, chasing dreams deep blue. The reason is simple: the longer the sword of an army, the safer the country is. It is worth mentioning that Pudong Shipyard recently launched 2 ships, 40,000-ton large amphibian attack ship 075, plus the 8 ships that previously served 20,000-ton large amphibian houseboat landing ship 071. The People's Navy has finally obtained 10 large amphibious ships, attack ship, a powerful landing force composed of landing ships. 20 years of hard work. China has become bigger. The power of the brand is there. Powerful military might, guaranteed, no matter how tense the situation may seem. It's not easy to slide out of control. All disputes end with the choice of pros and cons. There is no room for survival. In fact, the era we live in now, it's not the same as before. For most countries and regions, it is better to cooperate than to plunder each other. But on the other hand, times haven't changed. The muzzle of robber logic still pointing at everyone's forehead. So-called robber logic, they beat up China for a century. Now China is getting up and they can't beat it anymore. On the other hand, China is dangerous. So pay attention to what other countries think. It's meaningless. Only a determined answer to every muzzle of the robber. To be qualified to make your own choices. However, as the so-called 30 years in Hedong and 30 years in Heshi, now all arms are pinned on the power of China. To face the torture of a soul. Why provoke the world's largest? What about modern industrial countries? Isn't it good to live well? Have a better relationship with a country like this. Isn't that nice?